It is. Hello and welcome to the second lesson on command tactics and strategy. Today we'll be tackling the movement, or as we in the industry like to call it, the maneuvering. Let's get right into it. Since we already learned how a fleet can be formed, we can now talk about how a fleet can move. Moving ships is useful, since if you decide not to move ships, it will become a space station with space wasted for unused drives. The basic advance, or a straight advance, is pretty straightforward, literally. You move your ships towards the enemy without changing formation. That is, while still maintaining unit formational cohesion. In the case of wedge formation and any other formation with a strongly defined front, it means moving in the direction of where your formation is pointing. This movement is slow and extremely basic, but still useful. Advancing this way maintains your formation well, with ships moving in the same direction. They don't cross each other's paths, don't have to turn drastically, and as such, the L002 don't get confused and go the opposite ducking direction. Might need to move this guy up a bit.
Order confirmed.
Please? Nope.
Coming around. Right away. On my way. Forward.
A straight advance is also used as a basis of charges. Note that an advance in general doesn't have to follow all this, I'm just using the term in interest of clear communication. Changing the direction of your formation is more complex than you might give it credit for. One has to remember that if your formation is not entirely collinear, if one wishes to maintain formation, ships will have different distances to travel. This is where a point called pivot of maneuver comes in. Simplifying the concept, it is the point around which your formation rotates, and by extension, it is the focus of each ship's path, assuming the path is a segment of a circle, which it usually is. If the pivot of maneuver does not intersect with your formation, it is good practice to have a natural obstacle, hazard, or generally an object to act as your pivot of maneuver. This will cover the most exposed part of any movement, as the slow moving inside has limited space to work with when performing a pivot. It is imperative that you don't get caught in a flank while maneuvering. While a flank from the outside of your path circle isn't a complete disaster, you should not underestimate its effectiveness. The fast-moving ships of the outside should be able to get some distance from the enemy while the inside breaks formation to engage, but you will still have to break formation to do it. That brings us to breaking formation to reposition more efficiently is very much possible, but requires care and a lack of disruption. An attack at a disorganized fleet is very effective, as ships will naturally be out of their optimal position and not at a proper facing. To make the switch more manageable, do not move every ship at once. Stagger your movement so that you avoid coarse collisions. First, make space for the incoming ships on the other flank, then order one of your flanks to move ahead of the second flank, and have the second flank start their movement only when the first flank is already past their course. For increased control, first order your ships to turn to face the desired heading, and only thereafter order the movement ahead. You might have noticed that your center line remains stationary. This is not a coincidence, as it will act as your pivot of maneuver. There exist times where you want to change formation such that you move a flank to the other side of the formation and have it act as a new flank afterwards. To achieve that with the least pain, you typically want to extend the rest of your ships forward and then have the desired group switch positions while the main line waits in the relatively forward position for the flank to reform. You probably know the situation. You approach an enemy fleet with a good formation only to discover that they've put all their shield-piercing rockets on one side and your point defense is on the other side of your spearhead. You first never want to be in this situation, but we're gonna discuss scouting and information warfare on a future lesson. If you suddenly really need a specific capital ship on the other side of your formation, you've got a couple of basic options. 1. You can run the ship across the front line and hope it doesn't get shredded. 2. You can turn the ship around and traverse the battlefield behind your front line. 3. You can weave its course through your frontline ships. Or 4. You can make space in your formation to let the ship through. The first one has the advantage of speed. The ship is likely already facing the right direction to start the bank and be there as fast as possible. The problem here is that if the enemy retasks their guns to fire on your ship, you've lost both the ship and the part of your fleet the ship was to save. The second option is much less risky since the only moment of vulnerability is when the ship is turning and thus exposing its engines. The turning, however, makes this a painfully slow maneuver. The third option works well if the ship isn't too big or if your formation is sparse. If either of that is false, the ship won't fit and trying it will lead the navigation to plot a course such that it becomes either option 1 or 2. The fourth option has a good combination of both fastness and safeness, however, it puts all ships who made way for your maneuverer out of position. The less you have to move your frontline ships for this, the better it becomes, and the closer it becomes to option 3. A good use for a partial pivot of your formation is to flank the enemy while the rest holds the enemy in a binding engagement. To set this up, you want to approach with your main line off-center so that one of your flanks can engage the enemy straight up. You then move the other flank in a pivoting maneuver, using your center as its pivot point. This puts you from a line formation to an inverted wedge, which is in principle similar to a concave, something you already know. As you can then expect, this tactic focuses the fleet's firepower on the ships right in front of your center, thus outgunning the enemy in a small area. It's then easy to destroy priority targets or peel off ships of your flanking force to destroy the enemy's backline. After the center has been dealt with, the flanking force can move laterally in relation to your front line to destroy the force that has been engaged by your other flank. Be warned, however, this puts massive strain on the force binding the enemy. If you're not timely enough with the flank, or if your ships are just not that sturdy, the binding force is gonna be most likely destroyed. To prevent it, use faster, close-range and or heavy firepower ships in the flanking force while putting your tanky and sturdy ships in the binding force. Having good AA as part of the binding force is also a good idea. With that, we'll conclude this lesson. You can leave a comment with the next topic you want me to cover in the War College. So, remember to like if you liked it, comment if you have anything to add or ask, and as always, see you next time. Take care!